Well, as the left continues to rant and rave against the Trump administration's effort to tackle the bloated agency that USAID has become, Republicans maintain that drastic measures are necessary to tackle the fraud, waste, clearly abuse that has not only plagued this agency, but quite frankly defines it. Considering how Democrats claim they want more transparency in government, is that something that only applies in areas where they think the GOP will look bad? I mean, look, I have to applaud the Trump administration going in and cutting. You can restore, you can build back up if you need to, but it's layer upon layer upon layer. Here now to offer an insider's perspective on this is Catharine O'Neill Gillihan, former White House Liaison to USAID. Catharine, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perkins. And I have my little one here in my lap. You can see the top of her head, but she's joining us too.
Well, that's great. That'll be her first live interview on yes. Washington Watch. Make sure you put this in her baby book.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. You were appointed toward the end of the Trump first term of the Trump administration yes. to clean up the personnel within the agency and shut down a lot of these programs that are now all coming to the forefront. Did you see any accountability that was expected from those in USAID when you were there?
No, I didn't. I mean, if you look at the federal workforce and if you were to put them on a political spectrum, I would say about 97% of them are on the left. And so they're not going to want to do some of the things that we wanted to do. And that's just the reality. And I did actually serve at the State Department first for 3 years in the first term, starting in the beginning in 2017. So I had 3 years of experience dealing with these sorts of programs and funding and everything at the State Department. And then I went back to the campaign in 2020, and that's when I got a phone call to come in the day after the election in 2020 to start, revamping some of these efforts.
That's, I think, a great vantage point to look at USAID from the State Department, because it's supposed to work in concert with our foreign policy to support and really further American priorities in our foreign policy. And I worked very closely with the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, when I served on the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, and often found that USAID, although there were some good folks at the top in the last administration, in the Trump administration, it often was working at counter purposes.
Absolutely. That's actually where I started at the State Department, was the Office of International Religious Freedom with my beloved former boss, Pam Pryor, who I believe you know pretty well. So we were started in the Religious Freedom Office, and then we were moved up to the Undersecretary's front office that covered a lot of these programs: democracy, human rights, labor, refugees, trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. And the problem was that you would have two tracks. You would have one coming out of the State Department, and then you'd have one coming out of USAID. And oftentimes they weren't on the same page. And if you go back and look at the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, which followed the executive order that President Kennedy put in place to establish USAID, it says in the first few sentences of the bill that it should be under the advisement of the Department of State. So Trump's team is doing nothing out of character or out of the law, and I think that's the way it should be.
Well, if nothing else, what they're doing is they're pulling it back to the original intent, that it is to be a tool of our foreign policy through the State Department. Now, many on the left are appalled. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is reining in USAID. But based on the history and the statute, the creation of it that you just stated, aren't those reactions a little overblown?
Absolutely. They're totally overblown. And I think, actually Secretary of Rubio issued a bunch of waivers saying that there are some programs and fundings that are mission critical and in alignment with our national interests. And these recipients of the funding have to apply for the waivers. And there's so much insubordination that I was talking to a friend of mine who's in the thick of things, and he was saying that there were some employees that were refusing shipments at ports just because they wanted to protest this, the halting of these aids. I mean, the insubordination is so deep and it's so out of control. And Secretary Rubio has every right to do what he's doing. President Trump has every right. And I think the courts will prove that.
I think you're right. When you have someone that is working an agency or those within the agency working at counter purposes to the commander-in-chief who was elected by the people, to carry out a particular focus, America first in this case, he should expect those that work within those agencies to follow suit. I just have a little over a minute left, Catherine. Let me ask you this. So we know that it doesn't always, they're misdirected in many ways, but what about the waste? Did you see and firsthand a lot of waste and abuse of taxpayer dollars?
Absolutely. There's just a general malaise within federal agencies. I'm in the private sector now. I started a business about 4 years ago, and we've been doing really well. We're very successful. But there's a general malaise and there's not a fire to get things done in the government. And so there would be meetings to have meetings to have meetings, then to make a plan. And so there's just a lot of wasted time and a lot of inaction. And I think President Trump this time around is putting people in place that are coming from the private sector that know how to get things done and know how to do them efficiently and quickly. And that's what the American taxpayer should want out of our government.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's quite evident that he is doing that, and he comes in this time much different than he did in 2016, knowing that people are not necessarily going to get in line, and it may be time for them to get out if they're going to work at counter purposes. Catherine, I want to thank you for joining us, and your little girl was great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perkins. It was great to see you.
All right. Have a great day.